Hello, today I will report the results of two production experiments, each of Chinese and German children. At first, I will introduce the typological differences between Chinese and German relative clothes, namely RC, and then I will move on to the previous studies on RC acquisition in Chinese and German. Finally, I will present the results of the current study. Concerning the position of the head nod relative to RC, there are typologically primarily two different RC types. Head final RC, such as Chinese RC, where the head nod stands after the RC. Compared to Chinese RCs, English and German RCs are typical for the head initial type. Here are two examples, each of SRC and ORC in the three languages with the head nod marked in bold and the embedded noun marked in italics. Besides the position of the head noun, Chinese RCs are characteristic for the position of the noun-modifying marker de, which can be used across all types of noun modification, such as adjective, genitive, and RC in Chinese. Here I have marked it in red. In comparison to Chinese RCs, German RCs are recognizable by a relative pronoun marked with case. See the fonts marked in green. Furthermore, German RC is characteristic for having the verb at the end of the clause. Now we turn to the previous studies on RC acquisition. In terms of the RC acquisition in Chinese, there is a controversy surrounding the acquisition order between SRC and ORC. While some studies have observed early acquisition of SRC, which can be accounted for by the higher frequency of SRC in the child-directed speech, other studies have demonstrated that ORCs are acquired earlier, as ORCs are structurally more similar to the simple SVO sentence. As for the RC acquisition in German, a consistent pattern of early acquisition of SRC has been observed. The explanation also drew on the higher frequency of SRC in the child-directed speech and the similarity to simple SVO sentence. The observed patterns in children also apply to RC processing in adults, while studies on RC processing in Chinese have also provided evidence for either an SRC or an ORC advantage. SRCs are consistently easier to process in German. Okay, now let's go to the present study. A guiding question of the present study is whether the differences in form between the two languages lead to different acquisition trajectories. Based on the previous studies, we proposed three hypotheses about this question. The frequency of RCs in the child-directed speech predicts early acquisition of SRC in both Chinese and German children. The similarity to the simple SVO sentence predicts that Chinese children acquire ORC before SRC, while German children show an opposite pattern. Regarding the RC acquisition in general, the complex morphological paradigm in German predicts later RC acquisition by German children relative to Chinese children. As mentioned above, the studies on RC processing show the same pattern as those on RC acquisition in Chinese and in German, indicating a close relationship between RC processing and RC acquisition. Accordingly, we also expect that the factors which have an influence on RC processing could also impact RC acquisition. One of the most frequently investigated factors in RC processing studies appears to be the animacy of the head noun and the embedded noun. In two corpus studies, each on Chinese and German, it was observed that in Chinese and German, SRCs appear most frequently with an animate head noun and an inanimate embedded noun, while ORCs most frequently possess an inanimate head noun and an animate embedded noun. Both SRCs and ORCs formed with both animate nouns are dispreferred because of the semantic interference. Based on this observation, the preferred and dispreferred animus configuration is summarized as shown in the following table. The studies investigating the influence of animacy on RC processing have indicated a shorter reading time of SRC and ORC in the preferred compared to the dispreferred animacy pattern. Moreover, the difference in reading time between SRC and ORC can no longer be held in the preferred animacy pattern. Based on these studies, we assumed a similar influence of animacy on RC acquisition and hypothesized that first, children performed better in SRC and ORC production in the preferred animacy pattern. Second, smaller difference and even no difference between SRC and ORC in the preferred animacy pattern can be detected. A total of 52 Chinese children from Jiangsu province in mainland China and 55 German children from Baden-Württemberg state in Germany participated in the study. They formed 4 age groups. For each age group, there were 10 to 15 children. The production experiments in Chinese and German used the same materials, differing only in language. There were 32 critical items, 50% targeting SRC, 15% targeting ORC. Across RC conditions, 1/4 of the materials used the preferred animacy pattern. The other 3/4 used the dispreferred pattern. 32 fillers in form of the main clothes were added. The critical items and the fillers were evenly distributed over 4 blocks. The order of the 4 blocks was randomized. Now let's take a look at the procedure. The task was to verbally distinguish between 2 references as a response to a question asked by a native speaker experimenter. Here is an example of a trial conducted with ORC in the preferred animacy pattern. At first, the experimenter showed 2 identical images on iPad and introduced them. Here we have 2 apples. Then 2 more pictures were uncovered, which helped to distinguish between the head-nod reference. This is the apple that the bear eats. This is the apple that the hare eats. Finally, the experimenter pointed to one of the pictures showing the head-nod reference and posed the question, "Which apple is this?" Here, a verbal response from children was to be expected. For example, "The apple that the hare eats." Here is another example of a trial conducted with ORC in the dispreferred animacy pattern. The responses were coded for accuracy and fitted to a mixed effects model using logistic regression with language, age group, RC type, animacy configuration, and their interaction as fixed factors, and participants and items as random factors. Okay, now we finally get to the results. These 2 figures present the proportion of correct RC responses for each age group and each RC type in the preferred animacy pattern from Chinese children and the German children respectively. Comparing the 2 figures, we can find that Chinese children generally performed better in RC production than German children. If we compare the yellow lines with the blue lines in the 2 figures each, we can observe an SRC advantage in both Chinese and German. The effect of age group is also evident, with the proportion of target responses rising with increasing age. Now let's turn to the dispreferred animacy pattern. As can be seen here, the overall better performance of the Chinese children and the increasing trend with the age are maintained in this pattern. However, the changes in the animacy pattern also lead to some changes in the performance of children, which is reflected in the modification of the SRC advantage observed in the preferred pattern in both Chinese and German. Comparing the preferred with the dispreferred pattern in Chinese and German respectively, it can be seen that the SRC advantage is balanced by the dispreferred animus pattern in Chinese, while in German the SRC advantage is more pronounced in the dispreferred pattern, which indicates that in Chinese, SRCs are more negatively affected by the dispreferred animacy configuration, while in German, ORCs. In addition to this three-way interaction between RC type, animacy, and a language group, the animacy pattern also shows a main effect in that the preferred animacy pattern led to better performance in both language groups. Regarding errors, Chinese children relied on an identical replacement strategy of omitting the RC internal verb, resulting in a genitive construction in both the SRC and ORC condition. It can be seen that the omission of the verb in RCs gives the three structures the same appearance, which is marked in red. Compared to Chinese children, German children most frequently convert ORC to SRC in the ORC condition, while in the SRC condition, the conversion and the errors overall occurred less often. As for the Chinese children, the earlier acquisition of SRC can be attributed to higher frequency of SRC in the child-directed speech on the one hand. On the other hand, based on the higher accuracy of SRC and the genitive construction as the most frequent error, we assumed a new acquisition trajectory that Chinese children go through. Instead of the main clause, Chinese children seem to acquire RCs through the genitive construction, which again leads to an early acquisition of SRC due to greater structural similarity between SRC and the genitive construction. To produce an SRC on the basis of a genitive, a verb has to be linked to the first noun in the under-N structure, leaving most part of the genitive structure intact. However, when producing an ORC based on the genitive construction, a verb has to be inserted between the first noun and the relativizer or genitive marker de, requiring much more restructuring. As a result, children acquire SRC prior to ORC. The observation of the early acquisition of SRC by German children is in line with previous studies and can be accounted for by the higher frequency of SRC in the child-directed speech and the greater structural similarity between SRC and the main clause. In this study, we have also observed an early acquisition of RC by Chinese children relative to German children, which may be due to the de construction used consistently across all types of non-modification in Chinese. In comparison, German lacks such a similarity between RC and other non-modification structures. To produce RC, German children must process several cues such as word order, case marking, and animacy simultaneously, which places a high demand on children's working memory. As a result, RC acquisition is delayed in German relative to Chinese. This study also evidences a language general advantage for the preferred animacy pattern, which suggests that children from both language groups were sensitive to the same animacy configuration pattern as adults. In terms of the interaction between RC type and the animacy, the dispreferred animacy configuration with both animated nouns exerted a greater influence on SRC than on ORC in Chinese. This observation may be accounted for by the stronger semantic interference due to smaller distance between the head noun and the embedded noun in SRC than in ORC. In contrast, the dispreferred animacy pattern shows a stronger impact on ORC than on SRC in German, since the head noun as a topic is usually assigned the subject function when the animacy of the head noun and the embedded noun do not differ. As a result, there were also more conversions from ORC to SRC in the ORC condition under the dispreferred animacy pattern compared to the preferred animacy pattern. Okay, that's all. Thank you for your attention.